Hi, I'm Mike Dano with Light Reading, and I'm here with Mike Zeto from Boingo, who's going to tell us all about the new Boingo. Is that a fair way to put it? The Boingo post DigitalBridge transaction. The DigitalBridge is this massive infrastructure company, purchased Boingo about a year or two ago.
It'll be our 1 year anniversary, June 2nd.
So here we are.
Yeah.
On the anniversary, where is Boingo now? Following that big transaction?
Yeah, so Boingo, our business is still the same, but we've added to it. And going from public to private gives you the flexibility to go out and run a little faster, and have a little longer tail on the investments that you make, which is great. And DigitalBridge, as you know, is one of the best partners you could ever have if you're in our space, right?
I've heard them say that they hire athletes to run companies. That's the attitude of like, let's let these guys go.
I mean, look, if you look at our leadership team, we actually have a bunch of athletes, former athletes on the leadership team, and then I think we've got some of the best people in the industry. We've got a great team. We've coalesced. The board's great, and again, they're focused on digital infrastructure. And that's what we've always been focused on for the last 20 years of Boingo, and now we've added to it. We went from, as you would have known us back in the day, Wi-Fi in airports, to Wi-Fi and DAS in airports, to the first CBRS system being deployed at Love Field, to now private networks. We've got a tower business along with a successful military broadband ISP business. So, we're doing some of the same things we did, but we've added towers to the mix, and we've added private networks to the mix, and we just keep working, and we're finding new iconic venues to deploy converged network technologies to, and DigitalBridge is right behind us saying, hey, go faster, add more value to the customers, and in turn, that adds value to, obviously, their investment, right?
Right. Yeah. And so you mentioned iconic venues, and we were just, before we started recording, we were talking about, I guess there's one in Long Island that is a relatively new deployment, but is sort of, like you were talking about, like sort of it's an example of converged networks, it's an example of an iconic venue, it's a big deal, so maybe talk about that.
So it's interesting, it's the MTA's East Side Access Project, right? And it's in New York City, and we're basically...
This is subway.
Subway. Exactly. Yeah, well, it's rail, right?
Rail.
And we're connecting the Long Island Railroad to Grand Central Terminal, right? And it's an $11 billion project. It's the biggest underground infrastructure project in the U.S. in the last 40 years. Wow. And communications technologies sit at the core of that, right? You're going from above ground to underground, tunnels, platforms, extremely complex, was competitive bid. And we've done a lot of work in New York. We work with the Port Authority, we have all the airports, we've been working with the MTA for a while, and this deal is really interesting because it was really use case driven. So we're talking more about outcomes now instead of just network technology, which is good. And they were really trying to drive some specific outcomes with their communications technology strategy. It's a converged network, to your point. We're deploying Wi-Fi throughout the project, and that'll be Wi-Fi 6, public DAS and 5G, right, so that we can provide better coverage for our carrier partners, consumers, so that they have a better ridership experience. We've got CBRS and private networks being used for the conductors to be able to do mobile ticketing and take payments, right, and improve the experience, drive efficiencies. You've got remote monitoring of the trains, right, for diagnostic purposes. And then info from that going to an app that the Long Island Railroad users can basically check train times and make sure everything's running on time. And then you've got all these other IoT operational efficiencies they're trying to drive with the networks. So, instead of just looking at it like we need connectivity, it's more, we're trying to drive these outcomes that add a ton of value for the MTA and for its passengers to provide a world-class experience.
Wow. And you're connecting people's smartphones so that they have coverage in that location.
Yeah, it's like,
in addition to that, there's all this other stuff that you're doing as well.
Absolutely.
Because it used to be just like, I want to make a call.
Yeah.
And that's not the discussion anymore.
No, not at all. Yeah. Not at all. I mean, in fact, the panel that we just had, it was very focused on the enterprise and driving outcomes for the enterprise, and that's why we stood up the private network business. We've been providing the design, build, and manage services, and really providing what everybody now refers to as network as a service for 20 years with Wi-Fi networks. For us to extend that to private cellular and private 5G, into different verticals just made a ton of sense.
Right.
So now we're in manufacturing, we're in healthcare, we've always been in sports and entertainment, always been in the transportation hubs. We're seeing a lot of traction, as you know, come with private 5G in the DoD, right, and the Fed space. So we're making a tremendous amount of traction in new verticals as the faster moving Boingo.
Okay, so I think that is what we should talk about, is the private wireless thing. I think a lot of people have been talking about that. There's just a ton of interest in there. Just briefly before we go to private wireless though, you did mention that Boingo is doing towers. Which is a relatively new thing. Just maybe explain that a little bit, and then let's
yeah.
talk
So we're doing towers and small cells on military bases.
Okay.
Right. We've got deep relationships that we've had for a very long time, providing broadband ISP services to servicemen and women at 60 plus military bases around the U.S., several 100,000 at any one time as far as servicemen and women that we're providing Wi-Fi services to. And it was a natural extension because they also need cellular coverage on those bases. So we're building macro sites there now on military bases, which again, new business that we stood up, and then adding small cells as well to that. So.
And I think DigitalBridge knows a little bit about macro cell tower, but they seem to have some operations, just a little bit. They have this huge ownership all over the world about macro towers.
Absolutely.
Right. So let's talk about private wireless.
Yeah.
I mean, that you're talking about private wireless here. I guess you have some pretty high targets for growth of the Boingo private wireless, but it's a lot of private wireless business. There's a lot of other companies here at this show that are talking about private wireless. So maybe talk a little bit about how you're viewing that market. What are you expecting from the Boingo private wireless business? And then, what is this opportunity? What are you seeing in the market there?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's been private networks out there for a long time, right? I mean, and I think, I've seen a lot of the pieces that you've done, right? And some of
I write about it practically all the time.
Exactly.
I'm writing one literally right now about a hotel doing a private wireless network.
Yeah,
so it's a thing.
It was funny because back in my other life, we wanted
AT&T.
to, at AT&T, we wanted to stand up a private network business for utilities, and there was challenges with that, right?
Yeah.
But you've seen that start to now come about with other players in that space. There was always talk about private networks and the value around mining, right, in oil and gas, which makes total sense. But now we're really starting to see it move indoors, right, to manufacturing and healthcare. Sports and entertainment, we're starting to see it. There's a ton of opportunity for private wireless, private cellular in building. And I think the COVID slowed a lot down, obviously, right? But I think it's also accelerating the need for private wireless now because enterprises' digitization strategies are actually accelerating, right? And that's more, it's taxing the public networks, taxing the Wi-Fi networks, and they're saying we need something else. So I don't ever think that anybody's going to rip out Wi-Fi like some of the early industry folks thought.
Okay.
I feel like it's going to be a mix of public cellular, of Wi-Fi, and then of private networks and private 5G. When you add MEC to that, and you're getting single-digit latency, right? And you're getting everything, the massive amounts of devices that you connect, and the security. That's what enterprises want, and we're starting to see things go from POCs to commercial engagements. And I think the last thing I read, there was several hundred commercial engagements that were stood up across the U.S. I think you'll see that number tripled, quadrupled this year, and then over the next 2 to 4 years, you'll see an acceleration in some verticals, and then you'll see some consolidation in the market, because it seems like everybody's trying to get a piece of this right now and figure out where they fit in the value chain. And I think that we will eventually see some consolidation. There'll be some winners and losers. But at the heart of it, I think what enterprises are realizing is they now need somebody to manage the service for them, at least in the initial stages. Right, so network as a service with private wireless and private cellular is going to be a big offer that will be adopted in the market. And
for Boingo specifically, you mentioned that you've got some growth targets for that private wireless business specifically.
Yeah, I mean, look, anytime you're standing something up, you want to double, triple, quadruple the business every year.
That's the goal.
Certainly very aggressive when you're still in early stage adoption, right, as far as the curve goes. But to double the business every year is something that we'd certainly like to do. The nice thing is now that we're private, it's a little easier to do that.
A little less pressure.
Yeah, you go out, there's plenty of logos out there that need help, and frankly, we're getting a lot of inbound from many of the verticals that we didn't play in before, and that's a good sign.
All right, there you go. We'll leave it there. Mike, thanks so much for joining us
today. Thanks, Mike. It was great to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Appreciate it.